All right. So here goes our second Q&A. I'm excited about the questions that you guys submitted. Some good questions. I like when you give me some fun questions, some challenging questions. It's always fun to see what you guys come up with. So today I'm going to start running through those. I think we have about like 8 questions. So I'm going to get through these. We'll see how long it takes. But I think I think these are really relevant questions to most people in the program. So even if you didn't submit a question or you had one question that you were looking to get answered, please watch the whole thing. I think there's a lot of really good questions in here, and hopefully you'll get a lot of good answers out of this too. So the first question was, and I'm going to always be looking over my notes over here, how do you go about determining someone's macros? Well, that's like the golden question, right? That's what everyone wants to know. Is there some magic formula? And really, there's not a magic formula. There is a little bit of science to it, but then there's a little bit of just clinical experience and using us as dietitians, using our judgment and our experience over the years to figure it out. And it really does not have to be perfect. Like I've talked about before, you're not a robot. You don't have to have 30% calorie, macros from protein every single day. It's not going to be a make or break for your weight loss if you are off a little bit. I would say within 5% up or down, it's really okay. And at the end of the day, the more important thing is the calorie deficit first and foremost, and the habits, the lifestyles, the routines. The macros are a little bit higher level, especially if you're trying to work on your body composition, if you're trying to achieve certain like athletic goals or physique goals. That's where macros, you really want to be more honed in on your macros, but it's really not going to make or break if you're off a little bit. So that's all my preface in saying that there's no perfect formula. And it really does depend on your goals. So macros, so if I were to walk you through my process as a dietitian, if you came to me and said, what do I need my macros to be? So I would look at things first and foremost. Are you trying to gain weight, lose weight, maintain weight? That's going to determine your macros. And then I'm going to look at all of your personal factors. So how old you are, how athletic you are, your gender, your health history, all of these different things. And then from there, I'm probably going to look at starting. Usually I like to start, you probably heard me say this in other modules, 30, 40, 40, which is 30% protein, 40% carbs, 40% fat. And then I tend to play around with that a little bit more, but that's always a nice starting point. And then I usually play around with the carbs a little bit. So say you are someone who's maybe older, you're postmenopausal, or maybe your labs show that you have insulin resistance, then I'm probably going to drop the carbs. But maybe if you're younger, if you are really active, if you do a lot of cardio, if you're just very adapted to carbs, or maybe you're pregnant, you're breastfeeding, then I'm going to go higher on the carbs. So there's lots of levers that you can play with. And again, it all comes down to your specific personal like combination of these different variables. But that's the thought process that I'm going through when I'm determining someone's macros. But again, if you want to just have a good starting point, the 30, 40, 40 is always a great starting point. And then you can move the levers from there essentially. But just know that there's a lot of different variables personally that could move each of those up or down. And that's when that's why you're in the program. That's what we use our clinical judgment to help you determine. So the next question was, what would be a good mix in for your water besides lemon or lime? Yeah, great question, because I know we all get bored of just drinking plain water, and you're trying to drink your 100 ounces, you got your Yeti or whatever it is, and you're just trying to get through it all. And it really does help to have some variety. So this is a great question. So I think the question was more just getting at what can we do to like spice up and keep the water goal interesting. So I came up with a couple ideas. The first and like most similar thing to what you're asking would be making like that spa water. So like if you get you could get like a big, what do you call those things? Water dispensers, and then you can just make it look like they do in the spa. You add like the mint and the cucumber and the lime and the lemon and all those fun things that you can add. There's lots of combinations of water, fun water combinations like berries and mint and all these different herbs and stuff. So that's the starting point. You can also buy individual water bottles that have a diffuser section in them. You've probably seen them. Those are great as well, so that you can just continually have lots of different flavors, and you're getting lots of little nutrients in there too. You're getting some extra antioxidants and things like that. So that's really fun. That helps to spice things up. It makes you feel fancy, and it's not very expensive. So I would start there. That's probably the most similar thing to what you were asking about the lemon and the lime. I think cucumber and herbs and berries and stuff like that are a really yummy alternative and make you feel really fun. But then outside of that, some other things, sparkling water, we always talk about that. What I think a fun thing to do is do sparkling water with just like a little splash of juice or some lemon or some lime. It almost makes it feel like a fancy cocktail. So just adding a little flavor to that sparkling water can be really fun. And again, that's also a great base for a cocktail. Another fun idea, which is similar here, would be coconut water. So coconut water with like maybe a little cucumber or lemon or lime or something like that. Cucumber water is great because it definitely adds just some more flavor, some more variety, but then it also has those electrolytes. So you're getting a replenishment of electrolytes at the same time. So I know it can be an acquired taste, the coconut water. It was a big fad like a couple of years ago, and I don't know what happened to it. It got like really popular and then kind of like got forgotten or was forgotten. So definitely revisit coconut water. That's a good one. And then you can also get if you like the idea of electrolytes, you can get trace mineral drops. You can get mineral drops. You can get electrolyte drops. There's all kinds of products like that. There's one that Tammy told me about that's called Perfect Aminos. So go check that one out. That's an electrolyte additive for water. You can also do apple cider vinegar. Now, that's not going to taste as good. It's going to be a little bitter, but it's good for stimulating digestion. So that's why people like to there was that whole fad of taking a shot of apple cider vinegar in the morning. And the theory was it stimulates metabolism and digestion. So it stimulates digestion, but there is some validity to it. So you can take apple cider vinegar before maybe a heavy meal, and that'll help to stimulate digestion. Not going to taste great, but that's something you can add to your water. And then another alternative is, it's not exactly water, but sipping on bone broth is a great nutrient dense drink that's still very light, I would say it's no calories, and you can warm it up. You can have it like hot, almost like a tea. And it's really great for the gut lining specifically. It has lots of glutamine in it, which helps to restore the gut lining. So that's a nice like drink to sip on, especially if it's cold. And just another alternative, again, to get you some variety. So teas and bone broth and coconut water and spa water, these are all just ideas of how to spice up water and keep it interesting when you're trying to drink that 100 ounces or so a day. And then the second question was kind of a follow-up to that was, are there any powders or liquids that you could add to your water? So I'm not a really big fan of like the pre-workout drinks or like the Mio drops or Crystal Light or anything like that. They tend to have a lot of chemicals in them. So I would stay away from those. There is one that I recently learned about at Costco called Protein to Go. It has some sugar additives in it. It has some like stevia and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say it's like a drink every day type of situation, but it could be a good alternative like post-workout if you don't want to do like, again, like the pre-workout supplements and stuff. If you wanted something pre or post-workout that had a little extra boost, the Protein to Go water is a fun alternative. So that's at Costco. But outside of that, no other powders or liquids that I personally recommend. Maybe the other dietitians have some that they like, but I tend to stay away from those products because they tend to have a lot of poor quality ingredients. But hopefully that gives you a lot of ideas in the water department on how to keep drinking water and keep it interesting. Okay, then the next question, kind of similar, is asking about, there's two questions about coffee add-ins and alternatives. So the first thing I'm going to say is we have a section on the portal that's called coffee, something with coffee add-ins, and it actually gives a list of best to worst coffee add-ins and all of my recommended coffee add-ins. So go check that out. I'm not going to repeat all of that because it's already in the portal. I'm just going to highlight a couple of my favorites would probably be just like almond milk, just adding a plain milk. That's one of the cleanest things you can do. So the problem is a lot of creamers, a lot of coffee add-ins have a lot of chemicals and poor quality oils and stuff like that. So we're trying to stay away from those. So some clean options are just a milk, almond milk, oat milk. Then nut pods are one of my favorites. I think that was even mentioned in the question. And then you can actually add a protein powder. So like an unflavored collagen. That's also, it explains more in the portal about how to do that, but that's a great alternative to amp up your coffee a little bit. So the question was, which of these is the best? At that point, if they're all good, clean options, then it just comes down to taste and preference. Don't worry too much. Like all the ones you mentioned, unsweetened nut pods, unsweetened almond milk, unsweetened, yeah, all of those. But just be mindful of the coffee creamers. You mentioned coffee creamers. Almost every coffee creamer I've looked at, it's got some poor quality. Okay, I think the dog is gone. But just be careful with any creamer alternatives. Even the what look like to be really clean products, be careful with the creamers. They tend to have poor quality oils in them at a minimum. So out of your list, I would say the nut pods are great, the almond milk's great, and then check out the list that I have on the portal of best to worst and how to add in some of these specific ideas. So just be mindful, always reading the labels. They're very sneaky. They might look really clean and trendy, but just always look at the labels, and you'll see what's actually going on. The next question was best time of day to take supplements. So this totally depends on the supplement. There's really no general answer I can give you here. So for example, multivitamins, B complexes, you can take those in the morning. Magnesium is going to be one that you take at night. Things like your probiotics or supplements for your gut are going to be more with food. Some things need to be on an empty stomach. So just make sure you read, when you get our supplement recommendations from us, make sure you read all of the details that we give you in full script, because we will tell you the right time of day to take them. But there's really no specific answer here I can give you. It really just depends on the supplement, which I know is hard because you're like, I'm trying to just remember to take them in the first place. I got to take one at this time, one at this time. At the end of the day, I think it's better just to take them than not take them at all. So I wouldn't stress too much out about the timing if it means that you're not going to remember to take them at all. So if you're like, hey, I can do my morning ones, but I keep forgetting my evening ones, just take them all at once and it's better than nothing. So just remember that at the end of the day, it's better to take them than not take them at all. And then the next question was, I think is something a lot of our clients can relate to, even if this not specific scenario, but just the general idea here. So this question was life emergencies and taking care of yourself, how to stay on track when caring for a chronically sick loved one. Any advice? So again, we might not all be in the situation of caring for a chronically sick loved one, but we all probably have been there where we just feel like we're on the back burner. We are, having to prioritize something else first. And how do we just stay on track at all? So although I've never been in the specific situation of caring for a chronically sick loved one, I think the advice still applies. So my advice here is to forget the 80-20 rule. So the 80-20 rule, you hear me talk about that all the time, right? Like 80% of the time you need to be doing this, and this, and then 20% of the time you can have fun and let loose and indulge and stuff like that. So that's, you've heard me talk about that multiple times before. In this situation, I'm telling you, forget about it. Leave it behind. This is not a time for 80-20. 80-20 is flexible. 80-20 is a nice goal, but there's times where we're going to move that 80-20. And maybe you're more at like a 30-70 now. You're moving all the way down to like a 30-70, and that's okay. We're not always going to be at that 80-20. So I just want you to know there's flexibility, and put that out of your mind. Forget that for this scenario. We're not aiming for that standard right now. Right now, what I want you to think about is aiming for what I call the non-negotiables. And you may have heard me train on this before, but aiming for the non-negotiables for your health. So I want you to outline 2 to 3 non-negotiables for your health. So for me, I think my non-negotiables would be getting a walk every day, getting 9 hours of sleep. I need a lot of sleep. And it would be my water intake. I would say those, which is ironic because none of those are food related, but I would say those are my 3 non-negotiables. Like no matter where I am, what's going on, what life throws at me, what I can or can't control, I am always doing these things for my health. And maybe you go up to like 5, but I don't want you to overshoot this and make it more stressful than it needs to be. This is supposed to be a safety net. I fall back like, hey, when everything else goes wrong, I know without a doubt I can still make these things happen. So set the bar really low. Maybe you start with 2 or 3 and then you're like, okay, I can do 4, I can do 5. I wouldn't do more than 5 because again, this is supposed to be a backup option, not a lifelong like mantra. So your non-negotiables are your backup when things are going on. And then when things are better, when you have more time and energy, you can move up to thinking about other goals and thinking about the 80-20 and things like that. But in this season, just think about your non-negotiables and think about being consistent with those all the time. And that's all I want you to aim for right now. So you got a lot on your plate, but you still have to take care of yourself. Remember the oxygen mask analogy. You got to take care of yourself first to show up for this family member. And if you can at least do those baseline things, that's all I would expect you to focus on. Obviously, there's going to be days where hopefully you can do more, but at a minimum, just work on those areas that you outline, your 3 non-negotiables. The next question was about measurement fluctuation. So we talk about weight fluctuations a lot. So your question was, well, what happens when our measurements fluctuate? I would actually say not to be the bearer of bad news here, but I think this is actually human error. It's not common for your measurements to fluctuate that much, like on a week-to-week basis. Measurements move a lot more slowly, and when they do, it's really a sign of body composition changing. So it takes a lot for them to change. So I would actually say be a little bit more careful about how you're measuring. I know it's very easy to measure here versus here versus here. It's very easy to forget on a week-to-week basis exactly where you're measuring. So to help with this, there is a tool that is in the equipment section in the portal, and it is a measuring tape. I think it's around $30, which is a lot for measuring tape, but it helps you to be really exact with your measurements. So if you feel like you're all over the place and you can't be consistent, that may be a good tool to look into. All right, the next question was a lot of questions about drinks today. A question was about half our body weight. Okay, let me start over. Do we need to drink half our body weight in ounces, or do you recommend a gallon? Lots of different views on this. Absolutely. I personally have different views than other people. Google will tell you half your weight in body ounces. Some people will tell you a gallon. I like to say 80 to 100. Everyone does have a little bit of a different opinion. So I wouldn't overthink it too much. I think as a rule of thumb, the number one most important thing is, are you having clear pee? That's the simplest like baseline. We need to make sure we're doing that first and foremost. And so typically you can get to that at about like half your weight in ounces, but that's going to look different for everyone. So that's your number one goal. As long as you're hitting that, you're on the right track. But I personally find that the half the weight in ounces tends to be a little low, especially if you're someone who works out a lot or you live in a hot environment or you're sweating. I find that tends to be too low. And so I tend to do more like upwards of like 80 to 100 ounces. You can go up to a gallon depending on your body size too. It totally depends on your size, your weight, things like that. It's going to be more feasible for some people than others, but I think most people can do around 80 to 100 ounces. And then some people can push higher, and some people may struggle to get that 80 depending on your body size. But I think that's a more realistic range for most people, is that 80 to 100. One thing I wanted to preface and say though, was that make sure, I know you're trying to get all this water in, make sure you are not chugging water with meals, because what happens is you actually dilute your stomach acid, your stomach and your digestive juices. And it's a mistake a lot of people make. They're like, I'm drinking, or I'm eating all this food, I need to drink all this water. It's actually better to drink a lot of water before or after, but not actually during the meal and the digestion process. So just a little side tip that you didn't. Okay, so then the next question is a really big question. It is asking, what do I think about intermittent fasting? So there's two parts of the equation here that I want to address. The first is the research side, and then the second is the real life experience being in the trenches with women who are doing intermittent fasting and seeing those outcomes. So starting with the research, there's absolutely, undoubtedly research that supports intermittent fasting. You really can't deny that. So when people just go out all out and say intermittent fasting is bad, then I really don't understand where they're coming from, because the research is there. Also, I always think it's interesting the fact that intermittent fasting has been around for centuries. It is a tool used in all kinds of religions and cultures. And I think it's something to be said that the fact that we've been using this for years and years with our ancestors. So that's something to think about. But on the research side, there's a lot of benefits, and intermittent fasting the research explores a lot of different areas. So one of the benefits that they talk about in research is something called autophagy, which is basically like your cells cleaning themselves up. And that's a benefit that you can get when you take an extended time of not eating. Another benefit is insulin resistance. So there's an entire book on this. It's called The Obesity Code. It's really interesting. I think it's Dr. Fung, and it's talking about how insulin resistance, in his theory, insulin resistance is the main driver of obesity in our country, and intermittent fasting is the solution, which I don't agree with. I don't think it's the solution for everyone, but it's just an interesting read, and he does have a lot of research to back it up. So insulin resistance and intermittent fasting, definitely a thing. Then there's definitely research about how intermittent fasting can help repopulate good bacteria in your gut and just change the gut microbiome. And then there's also just the idea of weight loss with intermittent fasting. So they've done studies where they have people consume the same amount of calories. So say a 1,500 calorie diet, and the only difference is one group is eating throughout the day, another one's eating in an 8-hour window, and they see who loses the most weight or changes in metabolism and other biomarkers. And there's definitely improvements, slight improvements, I would say, in the fasting group. So it makes you think about some things. So the research is definitely there. And there's a lot you can dig into. Like I said, The Obesity Code's a great book. And so I'm a fan of intermittent fasting, but there's a lot of caveats. And I think it's really risky to just go into intermittent fasting if you have no idea what you're doing. A lot of people can do it wrong. A lot of people can just do more harm than good. And there's a lot of people who shouldn't be doing intermittent fasting in the first place. So I really only recommend intermittent fasting after I've seen someone's labs. I think it's really risky to do intermittent fasting if you don't know what your labs look like. Because again, you can do more harm than good. So there's quite a few groups of people who I think should not do intermittent fasting. So the first is if you have any history of eating disorders, that is definitely a no-go. Or if you just have a bad relationship with food that you've been trying to work on, if you're not good with food rules, if that tends to backfire on you, then this is not a good approach for you. So let's just put that one out there. That's a very obvious one. The second would be anyone with low blood sugar issues. You need to be eating on a more consistent basis than fasting. So that's a no-go. And then adrenal fatigue, adrenal burnout. You do not want to be putting that extra stress on the body. That's also no-go. And then I can also see it messing up thyroid and hormone levels. So if you're already in a position where you're trying to rebalance those and work on those, intermittent fasting is probably not the solution. So that's a lot of people. And just generally, if you're premenopausal, you're taking a gamble. So I would say for most people, that's not the first approach. Actually, it's definitely not the first approach. You guys know that, but it's not where I'm going to go. If I'm going to work with someone on insulin resistance, for example, I'm probably going to take the approach of working on a low carb diet versus jumping into intermittent fasting. That being said, a lot of people do get good results. Maybe you are part of a group that really can benefit. For example, if you're more menopausal, you can definitely be one of those people who sees great benefits. So it really is a little case-to-case basis, but at the same time, I would not recommend necessarily experimenting, because it can do more harm than good, especially if you just go really intense, you do 7 days a week, for months on end. It can really jack up your labs. So those are all the pieces of the puzzle I wanted to explain, because there's just not a straightforward answer. I like intermittent fasting, but I think it has its limitations, and you do have to be careful with who you're using it with. All right. And then the last question was about good habits and bad habits. The question was, are good habits going to help us get rid of bad habits? So the first book I'm going to recommend, or the first thing I'm going to recommend, is another book called Atomic Habits. You've probably seen us talk about it a lot, and we've been draw some of the information in the portal from that book. It is a great book. Absolutely go grab it if you haven't read it. And so that will go way more in detail about habits than I can ever explain. It is so well done. But in theory, yes, your theory is right. So the theory of habits is we're trying to make these routines automatic. We're trying to make them so easy that it's much easier to gravitate towards the healthy choice than the unhealthy choice. So we want to make it to where it's automatic, and it's so much easier. And we want to minimize the use of willpower, because we have a limited amount of brain decision-making capacity and willpower capacity during a day. And we don't want to have to use that on these types of habits, these types of routines every day. So we want to save our willpower for other stuff. We want to make this stuff automatic, so it's just easier and it's not a decision of willpower all the time. And so just remember that it takes time to change a habit. It takes time to change your lifestyle, and then it takes time to change your identity. So a habit is anywhere from like 21 to like 90 days. Lifestyle is around 12 to 18 months. And then identity, which is the ultimate goal, is usually 18 to 24 months. So remember, habits are just the first step on a much bigger scale here. We want to start with habits and then move towards changing our overall lifestyle and ultimately our identity. So great question, and great questions all around. I really enjoyed answering these. I'll probably be doing these every 3 to 4 weeks, again, just depending on demand. So make sure you get your questions in every time. And I'm excited to hear y'all's feedback. If you have any follow-up questions, let me know. But I'll be dropping this in the Facebook group, in the portal, in the newsletter. So make sure you take time to watch everything. Thanks, guys, for your questions, and I'll see you next time.